You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is about 5 ways to ruin your in-laws' Christmas. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Welcome to today's episode. By the title, you might be thinking, wow, this is kind of a harsh way to approach one of the most holy days of the year, Christmas, by talking about ways to ruin your in-laws' Christmas. But if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that that's probably tongue-in-cheek, and that's exactly where I'm going with this episode. It's really hard to go into the Christmas season knowing that we don't have peace in our families. We don't have the Hallmark card image of a family. We have strife, we have tension, we have manipulation, we have gaslighting, we have toxicity in our families. And so I did want to try to empower you in a kind of, like I said, a tongue-in-cheek kind of way for this holiday season when you're probably, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably being vilified in some way, shape, or form by your in-laws, or you're just dealing with a lot of garbage that comes with dealing with toxic people. So today's list, I will go through and I will share some ideas of how you can, quote, ruin your in-laws' Christmas. And what I really mean is these are ways that you can empower yourself, that you can do what I believe would be right by your immediate family. And in turn, because you are choosing your family, because you are making decisions for your family, it could possibly, in the mind of your in-laws, especially your toxic in-laws, ruin their Christmas, even though really it's all going to be on them. So let's go ahead and jump into the list. And number 1, in the 5 ways to ruin your in-laws' Christmas, decide to celebrate Mass at your parish at your preferred time. Now, so many in-laws get really bent out of shape around the holidays because they love to portray this idea that everybody in their family, it's just one big happy family. It's just everybody's getting along. You have the perfect family, even when you really don't, even when things are tumultuous behind the scenes. So by deciding to celebrate Mass at your parish, maybe your in-laws go to the same parish, but maybe instead of going to midnight Mass, which is when your in-laws want you to go, maybe it's when you have always gone to Mass for Christmas. Maybe you decide, you know what, we're going to go on Christmas Day. And that will probably be met with some resistance. But you know what? This is not about pleasing your in-laws. Even though it's the holidays, even though it's that time of year when everybody is supposed to kind of turn a blind eye to all of their relatives and all of their issues and just forgive and forget, right? Don't we love that phrase? This is a time when you can decide, you know, that is just not going to work out for us this year. I know we've always gone to midnight Mass, but I think for our family in this season of life, we're going to go to the morning Mass. And here's something that might be a little bit difficult, might be a little bit hard to do. You don't have to tell your in-laws that you're changing things up. You don't have to tell them that you have decided to go to a different Mass. You don't have to. No, it might not be the most quote-unquote courteous thing to do, but let's say you do plan to go to the same Mass, same time with your in-laws, and something happens. Maybe your kids are just so extra grumpy. Maybe they got into the candy canes and they're just a little bit too hyper and wound up to sit through midnight Mass. You can decide at the very last minute, even if everybody's already dressed up, even if the car's already running, to decide, you know what? This is probably not the best decision for our family. We will choose to opt out of Mass at this time, and we'll just go in the morning. You have permission. If you need permission, You don't, really, but you have my permission to decide to go to Mass when it suits your immediate family's needs best. All right, let's jump to number 2. This is the second way you can ruin your in-laws' Christmas. Screen all the gifts that are given to your kids by your in-laws and choose not to gift any that aren't appropriate. There are so many stories around this time of year from women who have toxic in-laws, toxic relationships with their parents as well, and there are issues around gift giving. Maybe it's when the grandparents ask for a wish list for the kids and they get them nothing on the list. Even though they specifically asked for the list, they go out and they get whatever they want. One woman that I'm aware of, her in-laws are exceedingly wealthy, and they choose to somehow get out of her and her husband or even the kids what the big present is going to be, the big gift, the big one that is supposed to be from mom and dad. And her in-laws will purposefully go out and buy that for the child and then give the gift to the child before Christmas so that she and her husband are left scrambling, trying to figure out what else they can give their child as the big gift. So here's the thing. You're the parent, and as uncomfortable, as prickly as the situation may be, you get to decide what your children open as gifts. Period. We are the parents. We are the final authority, God appointed, mind you, to decide what comes in to our children's lives. It's not your in-laws. And yes, grandma might throw a fit or grandpa might throw a fit, but you know what? That's on them if they decide to try to step in to that place where they don't belong and buy a gift that is not appropriate for them to give. Or maybe your in-laws buy things that really are not appropriate for your children, such as maybe things that are not age appropriate, whether it's something that is too old for them or maybe something that's even too young for them. You get to decide what the gifts are that your children will receive. Number 3, what is the third way that you can ruin your in-laws' Christmas? How about this? You allow your children to eat what you want them to eat. I know this is a difficult season for anybody who is trying to be careful with what they eat and how they eat. And it's all the marketing messages, everything around us that says, it's Christmas, just treat yourself. But again, we are the authority appointed by God to raise our children. And so if your in-laws are at your house or you're at their house or you're visiting and you have a limit for the number of sugary treats that they eat and you see your father-in-law slipping your child another cupcake, you see your mother-in-law giving your child another piece of candy, that's where you can step in and say, this is not what we're going to be doing this year. It doesn't matter if you've done it every other year. Guess what? You're the parents. You can change your mind. You can decide to do something totally different with your kids from one day to the next. And nobody really has any authority to challenge you on that. I'm assuming that you're doing things that are good for your child. But if your decision is, you know what, we are going to try to do a sugar-free Christmas. I know that sounds totally contrary, but you can do it. And you can decide, okay, well, maybe because we're doing a sugar-free Christmas, we'll allow the children one special treat on Christmas Day. Now, your in-laws, if they're used to having pies and cakes and cookies and brownies and all the things, that's going to be hard for them. But you can very calmly say, I know this is what we have done in the past, but we haven't been very pleased with how that has affected our children. And so this year we're doing something different. I hope you will respect that. And that's it. That's all you have to say. If they fuss, and I'm talking about your in-laws here, I mean, your children might fuss as well, but if your in-laws fuss about it. Say, this is a decision my husband and I have made. I hope you'll respect it. And then you might have to do the hard thing and walk out of a gathering. You might have to do the hard thing and ask your in-laws to leave. If they keep pushing back on your boundaries, unfortunately, sometimes we do have to stand up and face them and do what is right by our children, what is right for our family, even if the other adults in our lives don't understand, don't support us. And if your children get wind of this, if your children see that grandma and grandpa are siding with your child in this kind of situation, let's say you have a child and you've decided that you're only going to do, just a few treats, and your child has already had those treats, and grandma says, oh, come on, he can just have another cookie. What's the harm in another cookie? And then you say no. Well, your child is probably going to be upset. And then the grandparents, oftentimes, especially if they're toxic, will chime in and say, see how upset he is? He should not be upset on Christmas. This isn't, and really kind of manipulate you using your child against you. That's when it gets really, really hard for you to stand up and say, we have discussed this, and you can say this with your child listening if you need to. We have already discussed this. We've already made this decision, and we need to stick by it. I hope you'll respect that. Talking to your child, we have already talked about that. Mommy and Daddy have already talked about that. You've already had several treats. This is enough for now. We can talk about this later. And chances are, if your kid's riding a sugar high, it ain't going to go very well. But that doesn't change the fact that you're the parents, and you can decide this way to ruin your in-laws' Christmas by allowing your children to eat what you want them to eat. Now, the fourth way that you can ruin your in-laws' Christmas is to empower your children to decline unwanted hugs, unwanted kisses, whatever, from family members. Some cultures, I think especially in the South, which is one of the cultures that I'm most familiar with, or the Latino culture, which I'm also familiar with, being half Costa Rican, that is really, really hard to do. These cultures tend to disregard kind of personal autonomy, bodily autonomy in these ways. And they will just, especially in the Latino culture, you'll just get a hello with a kiss on one or two cheeks and a hug. If your kids don't like that, that's going to be hard to deal with. But you can talk with your children ahead of time and say, if you don't want Aunt so-and-so, Uncle so-and-so to give you a hug or kiss, if you don't want them to pick you up, if you don't want to sit in their lap, you can just say, no, thank you. And I will stand by you. I will help you say no. Or do you want me to say no for you? Those are ways that we can really give our children a voice in situations where in the past that was not really the case. That was not a thing for me growing up, to be able to look at an adult and tell them no for something like a hug or a kiss if I didn't want to do it. That was just unheard of. But thankfully, I feel like we have progressed as a culture and have come to the realization that, our children are independent beings. They should have a say in having a hug or giving a hug, getting a kiss or giving a kiss. They should have a say in these types of situations. So I really encourage you, if you do have some children who maybe are more shy or maybe have sensory issues with being touched, empower them. Whether you want to speak up for them yourself or they feel like they would like to speak up for themselves, of course, talk with your children ahead of time. But do allow them the opportunity to decline any kinds of affection that they are not comfortable with. Now, number 5 of the 5 ways to ruin your in-laws' Christmas: take over control how you spend Christmas Eve and Christmas Day by making it as hectic and as busy and as crazy, or as peaceful and calm and relaxing as your immediate family desires. Maybe you have in-laws that have a busy, busy holiday schedule like mine do. And we really rocked the boat when our oldest daughter came along and there was gathering after gathering, and we just said, no, we're not going to go to 3 things today and 3 things tomorrow. We'll go to 1, maybe we'll go to 2, but we're definitely not going to go to the one in the evening where people are smoking and bring our baby into that situation. Now, this is hard, especially if your husband enjoys those kind of gatherings, and it might not actually be that he necessarily enjoys them, but because it's family tradition and it's something that he grew up doing, that there is a kind of fondness that comes with the tradition of it happening every year. And so I feel like those kinds of things tend to create the idea of a warm, fuzzy, happy Christmas memory. But it might be that he actually doesn't enjoy all the busyness, enjoy all of the different activities. So you get to decide. You still have a few days. You still have a few days to iron out a plan and decide, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to have a busy Christmas Eve and then maybe a relaxing Christmas Day? Or maybe you have a relaxing Christmas Eve and have a busy Christmas Day. Or maybe both of them are busy, or maybe both of them are not. But you get to decide. You have the autonomy. Your immediate family is totally separate in the eyes of God from your in-laws. Yes, there is a connection by family, of course, but you are your own family unit. So you can decide what you want to do. And just like with the decision about where to celebrate Mass, you can decide at the last minute, you know what? Everybody's grumpy. The little one didn't get a nap. I'm tired. We have a lot to do at home. We've got gifts to wrap still. Now we're not going to go to this gathering on Christmas Eve. You don't have to give a lot of advance notice. With toxic people, sometimes a lot of advance notice tends to blow up in your face. So if you have this inkling that maybe you're not going to go, you can save your notice to the very last minute. And if you're worried about what will be said about you, if you're not there, they're going to say it whether you give them 5 weeks notice or 5 minutes notice. If you're not towing the line, if you're not doing what your in-laws want you to do, they're going to gossip about you anyway. So why give them a lot of time to drive over to your house and cause more drama? I would definitely be on the side of giving as little notice as possible to your in-laws if that's going to cause any kind of drama. Now, obviously, this episode was very tongue-in-cheek, very kind of contrarian to what most people would think when they would read the title of this episode, being 5 ways to ruin your in-laws' Christmas. So I want to throw in just one more thing. My bonus way to ruin your in-laws' Christmas is number 6. Let's focus on the birth of Jesus and not what your in-laws want to do. This Christmas season is not about family. It's not about family. It's not about gatherings. It's not about Christmas dinner. It's not about Christmas Eve. It's not about anything else but celebrating the birth of Jesus. And how did Jesus come into this world? Was it with a lot of fanfare? No. Was it with throngs and throngs of people? No. It was in a quiet, well, maybe not too quiet because of all the farm animals, but it was with animals and nobody else around. And then slowly some shepherds came wandering in. And then at Epiphany, we have the wise men. But it was not a huge thing. Now, does the church make a big deal out of Christmas? Of course. Of course. But that doesn't mean that we have to sacrifice our peace, sacrifice our sanity, sacrifice our mental health, and that of our children and our husbands on the altar of our in-laws' desires. Christmas is about Jesus. Christmas is about knowing that God loved us so much that he sent his son to die for us. And if that means taking a break from the in-laws for this holiday so that you can really focus on Jesus instead of having to do the mental gymnastics of dealing with your in-laws, I want you to feel like you have permission to do that, even though you don't need my permission. Sometimes we do feel like we need permission. We feel like we need somebody to say it's okay to not go along and do what we've done for years or decades, or in our husband's case, forever. We can take a step back and celebrate Christmas with a peaceful atmosphere, with simplicity, with just our immediate family around, just like it was only the Holy Family when Jesus was born. It was just St. Joseph, the Blessed Mother, and Jesus, and a few barn animals. If you want to bring in the barn animals, then so be it. But let's remember that Christmas does not need to be what it looks like on TV. It does not need to become what it is in all the Hallmark movies. The first Christmas was one of simple joy, simple love, simple peace, and simple hope. God bless you this Christmas. I hope that you are able to, at least in some way, shape, or form, celebrate it in the way that you and your husband and your children want to celebrate it, regardless of what your in-laws want you to do, regardless of what your parents want you to do. I pray that the peace of the Lord would be with you always. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.